Okay, good morning, everyone. We're going to get started, both in person and online. I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I'm Scott Carlson. I'm the Associate Executive Director at the American Bar Association in charge of the Center for Global Programs. This is our second annual Issues Conference for the Center for Global Programs, here hosted by GW Law School. This one, Countering Corruption and Abroad, Home and Abroad, has a very distinguished set of panelists, as well as some distinguished opening speakers. I'm not going to stand in the way of you and those speakers for much longer, but I want to start with a shout out to Dean Dayna Bowen Matthews for her hospitality, as always, and the remarks she's about to share with us from GW Law School. It's been a great partnership last year and this year, and we can't thank you enough. I'd also like to give a special thanks to our very own ROLI Chairman of the Board, Justice Breyer, who has made the trip down to join us in the midst of a positively torrid book tour. And I would be remiss if I did not say everyone here and online should run out and buy a copy of Reading the Constitution, Why I Chose Pragmatism, Not Textualism. And before I turn it over to Justice Breyer to get a dose of that pragmatism, I want to say a couple of housekeeping things. Restrooms are down the hall on the right, and that we will try to take questions during the panelist and online, and we ask you to be thinking about those in advance. So without further ado, one last housekeeping matter. You can also find the full bios for everyone if you scan this QR code on the back. For those of you online, you can go to the website and you can access that there. So in the interest of brevity, I won't go into long biographical descriptions about our distinguished panelists and speakers. I'll rather refer you to what's available online. So without further ado, Justice Breyer.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you to George. Thank you, Dean. And I mean, it's great that you have everybody here. And my publisher also says thank you, and he wants to point out there's nothing that limits you to buying one copy. For the judges, of course, this is an important issue. I mean, I remember sort of focusing on it first. We were having a conference and a meeting with judges from Latin American country. And she said before, so it shows progress can be made, because she said what used to be when you went in and applied to be magistrate or any judicial related office, they only asked one question. There were 3 words, one question. The person who was giving the office, he just said, "Who sent you?" And she had to say, "Well, nobody sent me, I saw it in person." He said, "Really?" So, and then things improved. All right. And we had a meeting with some Russian judges just after the Iron Curtain fell. And Yeltsin was at that time the head of Russia. And all the judges came. I was pretty interested. I was over there, and the judges from all over, Kamchatka, from they have really, it was similar, every race, every religion, everything. And they were only talking about one subject because Yeltsin had gotten up first and said there will be no more telephone justice. And telephone justice was when the party boss calls you on the telephone, tells you how to decide the case. And they said, "Is that true?" And they discussed it for a while. It meant a lot to them. And they discussed it for at least 10 minutes before they turned to the subject of judges' pay. But no, it was serious. It was serious. And when they came over here, Tony Kennedy said something that I think is important, which he told the Russian judges there. He said, "Well, what is this thing called judicial independence?" He said, "I'll tell you, we know it, but it's pretty hard to discuss. Why? Because are you being true to the record in this case if you're an appeals court judge? Or are you sort of slipping around with it? The one lawyer who wins will say, yes, you were great. The lawyer who loses will say nothing, but he'll think, what an idiot, at best. But you know, are you being true, or are you just trying to get publicity for yourself? I don't know why you would, it's not that great. But you might be. Or you might be doing what somebody else thinks you ought to do instead of what you think, is right in the circumstance. And you know who will know? Well, I know if you do that. No, nobody knows. You're the only one. You are the only one. You have the independence to do it. You better do it. Right thing. Independent. And by the way, if you're not, word will get out. Not necessarily about you, but about the system. And if word gets out about the system that this isn't straightforward, what does that do? Well, I've said 1,000 times, but it's certainly true. Rule of law requires people to follow case decisions and laws with which they sometimes disagree a lot. And maybe they're right. Maybe they're right. But if every time they really think they're right, and I've thought the majority is wrong on occasion, but if it's not in the spirit or the heart or whatever it is of the vast number of people in the country, you don't have a judicial system. And that means you don't have a rule of law. And that's what I like to tell the students. So, because they say we should have had more, well, I understand you're in that problem at the moment, and they're not going to listen to you. But in the long run, they may listen to you. In the long run, they may. And so from the judicial point of view, like every other, I can't think of a more important topic. How do you actually create the situation where the lack of corruption, no corruption, doing the job, doing it in a straightforward way that you know you've done it correctly? That's very hard and very important. I can't think of a more important support for the rule of law itself. So thank you for coming here, and thank you for having this conference, and thank you for making an effort. And there are indications over time you succeed.
Yes, it is your turn, Dean Matthews. I was going to invite you up. Thank you for those words, Justice Breyer. We obviously are in the business of making those incremental changes. So I think you've got a group of believers here. And if there were some doubters out there, hopefully you knocked them over on the line.
Thank you so much. I have to tell you that my remarks were written for me. So the reason that I'm going to talk for like 10 times as long as he talked is not my fault. And I know you'd much rather hear more from Justice Breyer than from me, but I do want to thank you very, very much for being here for this important conference. And I, of course, want to extend my deep gratitude. The reason I'm a little hoarse is because I was shouting with approbation all yesterday as Justice Breyer spoke for the fifth final conversation and talked about his book, which I do highly recommend, whether you buy 1, 2, 3, 4 copies. It's an extraordinary book. I also want to thank you for being here. I want to thank the ABA Center for Global Programs for organizing. And I just want to turn to you, Jessica Tillotman, and say you are the hardest working, most incredible subject matter dean that we have. We call them program directors, but you're so much more. Thank you for organizing this conference and pulling it off. Now I'm going to tell you, I'm going to go off script for a second because this room that you're in right now was the command center. They called it the war room. I don't know if you've read the papers lately, but the sort of bucolic peaceful scene that you see right out there belies what was here about a week and a half ago. And this was the quote unquote war room where we were sitting and watching outside what happens when the rule of law breaks down. Now you guys can quote me and you can put me in the paper. I hope you don't. But I'm going to tell you that what you're doing today has important impact and important meaning far beyond this room. Because we're GW Law, we sit right where the most pressing issues of our time occur. I don't think it's by accident. I know I sound a little existential, but that the universe put this conference on corruption here in the midst of the square where there could have been terrible, terrible, terrible breaches of the rule of law. Thank you for being here. What you're doing is so important. Now to my prepared remarks. Anti-corruption is the source of great strength here at GW Law. Professor Tillotman just published a book last month with Sophie Williams, with Professor Williams, who visited a few years ago on corruption in public procurement. It's put out by the Rutledge Handbook of Public Procurement Corruption, and it's the first of its kind. with 33 global chapters providing a comprehensive, multidisciplinary, geographically balanced treatise on corruption in public procurement. You guys just leave your credit cards here. We have lots of books for you to buy. Here's another one I highly recommend. Professor Chris Eukins and adjunct Professor Victoria Christoph and Dan Shohini also contributed chapters to this book, and we'll be hosting a number of global events relating to the book in the fall. Is it available today? It is online. Okay. Today's conference could not be more timely, as I've said. The first panel will discuss the connections between corruption and national security. In 2021, the Biden administration designated the fight against corruption as a fundamental U.S. national security concern, resulting in the inaugural United States strategy on countering corruption. Now, there has been much progress in recent years to address the impact of corruption on national security, including targeting illicit flows and holding corrupt officials accountable through a variety of expansive tools. Many anti-corruption experts also celebrated the enactment of the Foreign Extortion Prevention Act, FEPA, in December 2023, which empowers the United States to prosecute corruption of foreign officials that have gone unchecked for so long due to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act's limited reach. So although there's been much progress in the U.S. efforts to address global corruption, it's critical that we continue to look inward and address the severe corruption risks in our own backyard. No pun intended, right? SCOTUS's continued narrowing of the domestic corruption laws threatens to undermine the DOJ's ability to prosecute corruption, and the corruption and ethics scandals of recent administrations highlight the many weaknesses in our laws, which undermine U.S. standing in the global fight against corruption. And I'm going to tell you also, it undermines the trust of young law students in the legal system, right? And what we are doing here today, again, is enforcing and reinforcing the importance to a whole generation of new lawyers who in just their young lives have seen a number of institutions sort of in dispiriting succession fall to corruption and fraud. And that changes the way they will practice and whether they will believe in the rule of law and the law that they're studying. So major issues include the detrimental and opaque role of money in politics, the loss of trust in elections, foreign interference and corruption in the judiciary, which undermines attempts to address corruption. The second panel of the day will feature experts who can speak to the many challenges that we face in this area and some of the U.S. and global initiatives designed to protect elections and the political process and reduce the risk of corruption. Despite global progress in the fight against corruption, with a growing number of countries enhancing their anti-corruption laws and policy, it remains a significant challenge both in the United States and abroad. This program today will address some of the more challenging issues that threaten to undermine progress that has been made in this area. So today's conference is a continuation of many years of anti-corruption programming and initiatives here at GW Law. We have hosted many events in the past with the American Bar Association, and Scott, thank you very much for being here, despite the hurdles you had to overcome to be here. We really appreciate it. We are looking forward to hosting the annual conference of the International Forum on Business and Ethical Conduct in October. We also offer many classes in this area, including Jessica Tillotman's outstanding course on anti-corruption and compliance, as well as electives for students looking to specialize in this field. I welcome you one and all and wish you a very productive day.